are looking for HQ2. The new season starting next month, and they're looking more at how the technologies that come through companies such as Amazon might have that impact. And so we thought, I'm going to change up a little bit on you guys. You're journalists, you can handle this. Because we have had so many consultative presentations to you to start thinking about these things, I wanted to leverage their expertise in terms of how they see the big picture. I've had so many conversations with you guys over lunch and during breaks as to hear the level of interest and expertise that you all bring. I'm going to try to do a larger conversation and debrief with the help of our friends from KUOW, even as they bring their expertise to the table. So maybe I'll start with you, but this is really a chance for us to open up questions. And once we're ending here, we'll stick around to have more individual conversations. But I think this is a chance for us to think collectively and end strong on what I started with. Like, if we were to put out a declaration of best practices and principles as we try to make sense of AI and lead on this, what are the things that would matter to us most based on what we discussed and learned even today, or things that we just can't answer? I think that's what I'd love to see if we can capture for the rest of our time together. So with that, I just want to say hi to Joshua and Carolyn. Sort of tell us, based on what you guys have been paying very close attention to these conversations, you've been taking notes. I think some have been off the record and some have been on the record. Based on how we sort of frame the day, what do you think your ultimate takeaway is? Do you have hope for our world, given what we're trying to do from a leadership point of view?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that we're really excited about exploring in this season of our podcast is how we think about tech companies a little bit differently if we think about them as a consumer versus if we think of them as a citizen. And there's so many strong images that came out of this day for me when Facebook was talking about the sort of the suggested responses, and how in some ways those responses, though they're consumer, maybe we're looking at people's feeds as a consumer of those feeds and responding in that way. They suggest a way to think about the material. Similarly, in the way that you're always trying to think about the person at the center as a way to tell your story about the technology, as journalists, we're trying to do the same thing. We're looking for the people at the center, but we're also trying to not just think about the consumer, we're also trying to look for the citizen at the center too. What would you want to say about that, Carolyn?
Well, is this still? Yes, it is on. Okay, so yes, the consumer's at the center, but the citizen is also at the center, and I think that we're sort of at this point where we're collectively confused. The velocity of change, if you think about it, like whatever we've experienced as a city, watching Amazon grow rapidly in our midst, it's almost like a metaphor for the water we've all been in, watching technology go from being a sector, a little thing, off in the corner with all the bright kids in it, to suddenly being this really rapidly accelerating thing. And we've been talking about one fragment of that, which is AI. And yet we all, in the end, are going to end up having to make decisions about where we stand on how AI should be used and how it should join up with other technologies so that we can have the future we'd actually like to give our kids, as opposed to some of the fears we have about the future.
So from what you've seen so far in your reporting and even what you've been hearing here, how equipped are we to make those decisions as a society?
I think we're close, actually. I think we're closer than we think, because we know we should trust our instincts. I think that part's happened. The problem is that we all have fragments of agency. If we could figure out what to do with our small chunk of agency, I think that's where it's at. And what I mean is, the engineer is interested in efficiency because that's usually what the part of the problem is that they're trying to address. It can get fixed with an efficiency. But the communicator, that's not their role. They have other roles. The organization has a role, and it has something to do with what they're about. But it's too fragmented. There has to be some way to figure out how we can use our collective fragments of agency to start making decisions that actually move us all in the right direction together.
And Joshua, if we had that agency that Carolyn suggests, and we were able to come together and actually coalesce around a series of thoughts or principles or directives for the outside world, off the top of your head, given that you're a journalist, what would be the number one principle that you would like to really put out there?
I heard 4 really clear questions that were articulated that I want to start asking when I work on stories.
From my one question or from
No,
today?
from the series of presentations today. What I mean is I heard people articulating 4 good questions for me to ask as a journalist and for everybody who's working and communicating about technology to also be asking. What's the problem you're trying to solve here? And then, but not just that, what's the question you're asking, right? Because that can, can be biases involved. Are you trying to arrest more people or are you trying to improve community? Who is affected and how is the opposite side affected? Those are 4 really good questions that if we could start asking those every time we report on technology, every time we talk about technology, I think we'd be better able to evaluate the technologies that are presented before us. One takeaway for me from this whole thing is that AI is a very powerful tool, but the tools that we're using are very narrowly focused. They're very powerful as like wedges that you drive into a piece of timber that you're trying to split. They do that really well. But that is also their limitation, right? And you can begin to, when we understand AI better, we can begin to understand how the data sets are influencing the range, the power, but also the limitations of that tool. So I guess this is a little bit of contradictory advice. On the one hand, we know the technology itself can be distracting. It brings a lot of baggage with it, and we don't want to talk about all the bells and whistles. We want to talk about the people affected. On the other hand, when we're trying to think about the citizens and trying to think about these questions, we do have to talk about the technology behind it. So
that's very helpful. I mean, if I ask you the same question of you, and I'm actually prototyping this because I'd love to see whether any of you have, if there was that one practice or principle based on the conversations that we've had today or what you've been thinking about that you would love for us to coalesce around, that we put out there with some amount of narrative power to tell the world, this is what we should be focusing on right now. What would it be? And I'd be happy to take any of those comments, but maybe, Carolyn, if you have a thought about that as well.
Well, I mean, what I keep coming back to is not only when you think about this pretty new technology and the power and the knowledge that it's going to give us, we also have to think about the opposite. Who's the set of people who are targeted, and you can't just think of them abstractly. You have to go out and find them, expose them to what the technology can do, and see what they say, because there will always be consequences that you couldn't imagine. You can't imagine until you find out from the other what it's actually going to be. And then the hardest part of all is you have to integrate that into your decision. It can't just be, we heard you, cool. All right, okay, go ahead. You actually have to integrate it into the plan.
Great, thanks. Okay, let's pretend we're in Philadelphia in the late 1700s, and we are the original drafters of whatever declaration is going to happen there. What is the burning principle or practice that you would love for us to remember from what we've been talking about here today? Anybody want to take that first risky shot across the bow of the figurative British?
Oh, yay.
No, I'm never going to surrender the mic.
So there are a few things that I think about when we think about AI, in that it's still very abstract, and we're dealing with this new technology as kind of an abstraction and talking about it in sort of real practice. But then we have these other real things going on in the world, such as climate change, growth of authoritarianism, and the growing economic divide. And so the questions that come up to me, especially if we're talking about drafting a new declaration, is how can we use technology that's becoming more powerful and more powerful to help us solve these very, very real problems that we are seeing, not in our own country, but across the world.
I think I want to reflect that back to you in the context of Seattle based on the work you guys have done, because there is an opportunity and maybe a danger that, we recognize that we are so fundamentally flawed that we're thinking, well, if we can't social engineer ourselves, let's use the next technology to social engineer the problems that we couldn't solve. And we heard some of that in some of the presentations, like, humans are biased and racist, so let's fix that in the AI. From what you've done in your reporting, is that even possible, or is that just taking us down another road that amplifies the problem even further?
$1 million question. Thank you very much, Hussein. That's just cool. No, but I mean, the problem is I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I really thought my generation was going to fix all the problems. And here I am sitting in 2019 going, oh no, my generation is breaking everything.
You look too young to be a boomer. You must be a Gen Xer, aren't you?
Why, thank you, I'm on the line. So the thing is, we suspect, don't we? This is what I mean about our instincts. I think our instincts are telling us that if we don't do technology right now, including AI, we risk breaking things faster and worser than we have ever broken things before.
Did you, as a reporter, just say Worcester?
Yes.
I just wanted
Well,
to check.
That's part of our flair,
and
is we do that.
I don't want to get distracted by my poor linguistic use. What I'm just trying to say is that we sense that with great technological power comes great ability to break things more, harder, faster. And so while I'm optimistic, because I think we know we can be guided by our instincts in a good direction, just the last 3 years has really chastened me in the sense of seeing what we have managed to break. It's been swell. So it seems that a new order is required. It seems like we do need some sort of a manifesto that guides us going forward, that works on some values that we all agree on. And with the caveat that we have to be fair, like we are only human. There are great things about humanity, but we do cock up, we do make mistakes. So can we just not crucify each other on the way to finding a good way to do this? Can we talk to each other like people and be kind and develop these values as we go along in this evolving environment?
He's got another question. Over here.
Yeah. So we've talked about the approaches to using AI, and it's all based on data, big data, lots of data. And I think I'd like to see us keep in mind anecdotal data. And more importantly, how do we integrate anecdotal data into the methodologies we're already using with big data? I think that's the bigger challenge.
What's the difference between anecdotal data and data generally?
So anecdotal data would be stories that come from individuals that are very powerful. KUOW is a great example of using storytelling to inform us. And we do not use enough of that. I haven't seen much of it at all, in fact, in AI.
I want to tell you how we...
I have a question for you as well, based on that. Are stories, journalism stories, anecdotes, when you hear that AP is now using AI to generate stories, right?
Right, yeah, okay, so this is the thing, and I want you to understand what the role of the anecdote is in journalism. I read a lot of reports from academics and others, and they give me a sense of what a phenomenon is. But then I have to go out in the field and find it. And if I don't find it, then does it exist? And I really work hard on trying to find the truth in the data story or the expert story I've received. But if I can't find it on the ground, And then when I talk to the actual person I do find, that's where all the richness and depth is. Because as we all know, there's the knowledge of the thing, but then there is the thing itself. And we have to be guided indeed by the thing itself. You only get that by talking to human beings. To brains sitting in meat surrounds, if there are technical people in the room. You have to talk to actual humans.
And it gets to a larger question, and our program is focused on storytelling as the primary motivator behind behavioral change. But then as AI and these data sets become even more compelling and more useful to us, the watch I'm wearing right now has an ECG in it. And if I touch that, it's going to tell me whether I'm going to have a heart attack or not right now. Wow. That's not a story, that's a data point. Yes. But it will affect behavioral change in a very impactful way.
If you topple
does
over,
this, does this mean, do you believe, can we sort of say, are stories going to become less relevant to us as a species moving forward, given what role it's played, because we'll have a different source of inspiration around behavioral change? Am I asking the wrong person? I shouldn't be asking.
I apologize. I should let Joshua handle this one.
Well, it's, in exploring a little bit, one thing I'm working on is how, Amazon's expanding in fashion, right? And there are people who are designing fashion right now that is specifically to try to be contrary to what can be predicted by an AI. You know, they're specifically, and similarly with art, I think our art will be influenced by trying to be, you know, the things that only humans can still do. So I think in the storytelling can fill a same role. We have an urge to constantly contrast ourselves with the technology that's seeking to define us. And I don't think we'll ever lose our sense of the import of storytelling. We will just, you know, maybe define ourselves a little bit in opposition to the technology.
So we'll be the exception to the rules, what you're saying, from as storytellers versus the AI?
Well, I don't know, maybe the first line of the manifesto needs to be, machines are not the boss of us.
Oh, is that the first line? Machines
like
are not
it.
the boss of us? That's good.
I don't know, something like that. Humans
Yeah.
have to win.
Okay,
Whatever
somebody
we
take
do,
that down. I
humans
actually
win.
like that.
Great power should also pony up. So value-added tax for using my data. If I go through CTAC and it is capturing data through my participation and it wants my voluntary participation, probably there needs to be a kick into some way of improving the area. So, you know, we can talk about great responsibility, but the rubber meets the road with responsibility and how you use resources.
So you want to make this transactional.
In certain data transactions, you're damn right.
That's interesting, because I would worry that maybe poor people would then be incentivized to give away data that actually lead them to be more vulnerable.
But that's what policy is for, to shift from...
You don't have the mic anymore, sorry.
You should talk, that's cool. I want to hear more.
Over here.
What also strikes me from this whole day was thinking if we were going to add something to our declaration to go against most technological change and to try to slow down and rather try to be the biggest and the brightest, the fastest, to consider what we're doing and how we're making things rather than making them quote unquote powerful, making them good and ethical and thoughtful and perhaps more human.
This is something that came up just recently. I was working on a story about the future of grocery stores, and we're looking at all the robotic delivery systems that are coming in and stuff like that. And at the end of it, we were sort of saying, like what's the problem that's being resolved in this? Or is this just kind of a gold rush set off by panic caused by Amazon going into it first, you know?
Right, exactly. Are groceries broken? Is this something that needs to get fixed? Or is it just, a place where people are going to make tons of money?
And there may be ways in which the system is broken, and we're learning some of those ways. But there are also ways in which it's just fine. We like connecting with each other at the grocery store.
Mm-hmm. I liked what you said. I would add one more thing. If we could just be honest about how our organizations make their money, and like, because that's the thing. Like, it's really great to talk about values, but it always ends up colliding somehow with the truth of how the organization makes its money. I can think about that's become a major problem for some of the big 5 tech firms. And it's a real rock in the road. So, and again, it's not something that most people in this room have agency over, because we are not Satya Nadella, we are not, Mark Zuckerberg. So that I think is something that's really difficult and beyond the scope of what this room can handle, but it's there, it's real, it's in all of our jobs.
Okay, just to comment on the constitutional question of what with AI, I think one of the key things is that when we set up an AI-based system, that there is a specific set of ethics about what it's to be used for, what it's not to be used for, and its scope of purpose. And in specifically, as that point is decided upon, also to do the prevention of scope creep, so that the system cannot be expanded without the same authority that was granted by those individuals to make expansion decisions. Because the danger is that once a system is in, it's easy to modify or enhance, and it looks normal. But all of a sudden now, instead of a normal camera, it's a 4K camera or an 8K camera that happens to have military-grade lenses on it. And that, we just happened to make this decision. So I think part of the Constitution is when an AI system is granted authority and power, that its scope is limited exactly to that, and then it needs the same decisions that granted it its initial creation to actually modify it or enhance it or upgrade it, so that something doesn't happen under the covers and the Seattle City Council decided they wanted to do it, and yet, wait a minute, nobody else heard about it.
Basically, the slope is indeed slippery when it comes down to AI, from what you're saying.
I was also thinking about your constitutional challenge, Hanson, and I think what you said to start the day, which is just really understanding that we can shape this rather than it shaping us, is a huge first step. And I think that, I work at Microsoft, and we give a lot of love to the idea that the way to predict the future is to build it, is to create it. But, if you really take that challenge further, it's that we will all build the future that every day we're told is coming. And I think Comm Lead is to find out that human-centered future that we actually want to live in and persuade that and communicate that so that we all go to work and the engineers go to work every day and build it.
I think that's nice. A human-centered future. In fact, I've just introduced Star Trek to my 8-year-old son, and I explained to him that the original Star Trek series in the mid-'60s was, in science fiction at its best, is sort of showing the future as we fear it will be or we would like it to be. And there was integration. There was the first interracial kiss. There was a lot of stuff happening that inspired people to create new technology because of that. And so if I were to sort of say what my principle is, and I've shared this with my students in September, is that I think fundamentally we need a new narrative. The narratives that we have put together that have held us together are wearing thin, and we're seeing things fall apart because of that. We need a different narrative that brings us back together so that we can take on these larger, newer challenges. And I think you speak to that very well, David. I think I saw one more hand, and then we'll adjourn and let our KUOW people off the hook. Did I see one more person, or was it my imagination?
That's an interesting observation, Hussein, that you just made. I was just listening to you. I was reminded that the reason that so many people buy on Amazon Prime is because of the Prime Directive. And now I do realize...
You shall not interfere with a more primitive species? That's the Prime Directive from Star Trek.
I know, but that was... But what's Amazon's Prime Directive? For its customer obsession. And so this is the way it executes on that. So it just brings home to me how right you are when you say that we need some new paradigms through which to discuss these things, because the other ones are getting tattered at the edges.
Yeah.
They're not helping us see where we need to be and do.
Well, I'm glad you agree. Thanks for that. Well, I wanted to close with you guys asking you, well, you're here as reporters, you're here as interpreters and synthesizers. If you had been here to create a story out of what happened today, what do you think your headline or your first few words would have been in the radio story on KUOW? I went to journalism school too.
Yeah, I know.
Well, out of this event, definitely the looking for that manifesto is an interesting story. I mean, I think there's a broad sense out there that we need to hammer out something new, and that's exciting.
I think for me the headline will be, will AI elevate hope or will it crush it? And I thought that because of the woman who addressed us who had converted to Islam and immediately saw her life change. And I was really deeply shocked by that story. And AI had its role in that.
And that's why we continue to be motivated by stories, because that brings attention to things that we think we need to change. So,
Yeah.
Joshua and Carolyn from KUOW, thank you very much, and good luck with season 2 of
Thank
Prime.
you.
Thank you.
Hey, Hanson, can I say one thing, which is that though we cover Amazon in this podcast, we are using it as a lens to look at technology broadly.
Yes.
And if you have ideas about how technology interacts with us as a culture, how it shapes the city, we're interested in hearing from you. So you can contact us, on Twitter or whatever, and we want to talk with people at technology companies and people who are living with technology of all kinds, because that's how we learn more about this. So
We have a Facebook group, 500 people strong. Just it's on Facebook, primed.
It's actually a really wonderful podcast. It's highly entertaining. They have that unique wit, and you learn a lot at the same time. So thank you for doing that. It's a great public service. I'm on the board of KUOW too, so I had to give that disclaimer that I'm not just promoting them. I think it's really great work. So I want to finish where we started when I gave you this exhortation to think about a declaration and how that we have the power to change a narrative, that we as leaders and as communicators are that really important human interface between those who create the technology and those who put it out there, and how we can make sure that all sides are being served. I just want to remind you of this draft language, just a bit of it, that a communication leader supports humans through the journey of being human. We must not forget that journey, and hopefully we've taken you on a good journey today. That a communication leader understands the human nature is adapting to technology and works to align technology with human nature without exploiting people. So there's a lot of opportunity here, there's a lot of challenges here, and we have to be fully engaged, and we have to be inspired to be engaged. And I usually at this point of the day, we start thanking a lot of people who were involved in creating this event, but I just want to start with gratitude for each one of you. I'm amazed. I've hosted so many conferences and events around the world, and usually we lose everybody by lunchtime. And the fact that so many of you stayed, and the fact that you wanted to engage with us around these challenges that Molly crafted and put together, and to think about this and to share your amazing insights, it gives me hope that we do care about this particular subject and we want to move forward with it. So I want to thank you first and foremost for just even choosing to spend your day with us here. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. And because we feel like it just begins with this event, we were intent on documenting it. So we did live stream it. We captured the entire thing. We're creating a short documentary. My colleague Alex Stonehill. Alex, where are you? Oh, there you are, Alex. Alex is our storyteller, so I asked him to tell the best story possible about what happened today, and so we hope to share that soon with you. Our colleagues at WE who supported us are actually putting together a white paper on the future of AI and communication that we are co-signatories to, and so some of the things that came out of here today will go into that white paper, which of course will be shared with the public. And we intend to take a second attempt at this declaration, including some of the things we heard here today and cross-referencing them. I didn't share with you a lot of the lists that we created around the practices and principles, but I really believe that we have the opportunity to be heard around this if we can do it through our program, through our community, and through you as part of this movement. And so I want to thank our documenters, from Alex to our students, to Varvid, who helped capture the live stream, to Anita, my colleague, my dear colleague, Anita Verna-Crofts, who is the associate director of our program. Megan, over there doing social media. Is there anybody else, Molly, I should be thanking really loudly right now? Okay, all right. We'll stick around for a little bit longer. Noel and I see Claudia and a few more speakers are here still. There's Carrie. Carrie, I was going to get your opinions on some of the stories that we heard because they were really good, and I think they listened to you on those guidelines. So just thank you. This has been great. I think it's a first attempt, and we will continue to convene the public and educate collectively around this. And have a great weekend, and enjoy the sun. Thanks very much.